Afternoon, everybody. This is Debby Enoe from Teacher Success Coach with another of my female educator from around the world. We are looking at the challenges and triumph of online teaching at the Female Educators Roundtable. I would like to welcome my guest onto the show, and thank you very much for coming online. Today we'll be looking at the challenges of being a parent and also being an educator, being a new parent with small children, etc. So it would be fantastic for us to see that other side. Welcome, introduce yourself, tell us what country you come from, tell us the type of children you teach. It is up to you if you want to say the name of the school you teach at. And that's it. As much as or as little as you want to tell us. It's entirely up to you. Welcome aboard. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ariel, and I am an educator in the United States, in Florida, and I'll just leave it at that. And I teach middle school, 7th grade, English language arts students.
Okay. What age is 7th grade? Because in England, we're different.
Yes, the majority of my students are 12, a few 13-year-olds.
Okay. Right, so that's secondary, yeah. Okay, thank you very much and welcome. The fact that there's so many things I've got in my head to ask you. One of it is, can you tell us, what some of the challenges and triumph have been, you actually teaching online, because we did speak before that you have a new baby. So can you just tell us what the whole experience have been like, having to teach online with this baby and another little one? Talk to us about it.
Yeah, so I went on maternity leave a little bit early, like at 37 weeks, because I was having what I now know was pre-labor, and I was in pain and getting sick. And so I went ahead and went on leave in February. And then my son was born on March 5th, about 3 weeks into my maternity leave. And I was, on maternity leave. I had a sub in the classroom. Everything was fine. And then I guess everything started getting kind of crazy around here before our spring break. So that's like March, I think like the 17th, 18th kind of. So they let the kids go early. I know that they went home and the teachers had to go like before spring break. And then they ended up letting the teachers go too. And so they could deep clean the schools. And then they went on spring break with the expectation they would probably be back into the brick and mortar schools. Like when they got back, just take like a 2-week break, clean the schools, come back. But then when they were coming back, they're like, nope, we're online for the next at least 3 weeks after that into April. So I talked to my sub, and first of all, kind of gauged her comfort level with teaching online, and she was a little hesitant. And then I asked, we talked like a day later, and this was mid-March, and she was like, well, I don't think that the district is going to let me teach online. Since I'm a sub, I don't think they're going to continue paying me. So I don't know who's going to teach your classes. Probably the other teachers on my 7th grade team. And I didn't want that. So I contacted my principal and I said, if you guys are going to be online for a while, I'm just going to come back if that's okay. So I cut maternity leave short. And at this point, I only had really 3 weeks with my son after having him before I was back online teaching full-time with my students.
Wow. So you actually decided that the sub that was there, she wasn't too sure whether or not she was going to be able to teach online. So instead of your class going to another educator, you decide to come off maternity leave to actually teach your student online.
Yeah, because my fellow teachers already have their 70 kids that they have to worry about. And some of them have kids too. They're older, but they have families and things to take care of. And it's not fair for them to have to take on 30 more students. And since it was from home, like obviously I would not have probably been able to go into the school at 3 weeks because I was breastfeeding full time. But since it was online and it was at home, I just decided that, rather than divvy it out to all the other teachers, I would take on the responsibility of my classes again. And also I feel like I felt, like we talked about before, like one, I think the students really needed a little bit more stability. They needed their regular teacher back. I know that like some of them, their mental health wasn't doing the best because of the pandemic. So I wanted to be there for them. I was kind of emailing with them a little bit anyway, some of my students that did reach out, and it just seems like they needed some more support. And then also Florida is heavy on the testing, and I don't care as much about the evaluation piece of it. Like it is 30% or 20% of our, or 40% of our total evaluation for the year is test scores. I wasn't that worried about that, but I was worried about my students not doing well on those tests because that affects their schedule. So if they fail the test and they have to go into remedial reading the next year, that takes away an elective for them. So they wouldn't have the opportunity to do band or art or choir or agriculture or business. I think that's it for our electives. I just didn't want them to be, suffer from that with already having all this going on. So I just decided, I would come back and do the online teaching.
Oh my goodness, that's what you call dedication. Because the fact that you were on maternity leave and you actually come off maternity leave to teach the students online. So how was that in terms of you actually teaching them online with a baby on breast? How did you cope with that?
There were sometimes it was difficult more for like faculty meetings. So we still had like 3 or 4 faculty meetings per week via Zoom. And I had a Zoom with my students a couple times a week. So that was where it got a little more difficult because like at that age, a baby feeds on demand for the most part. Baby wants breast, baby gets it. So there were definitely faculty meetings where I had to have my camera off and just sit there and feed the baby while still talking and trying to go through everything. I know there were a few times that our administration wanted to see our faces for faculty meetings, and I just had to be very, straightforward to say, well, if I turn my camera on, you're going to see my boobs. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep my camera off. And also too, like new mom exhaustion it's real. And I walked around the house with my shirt off most days. So like even just having my camera off for faculty meetings and the fact that I did not look presentable in any way, having just had a baby 3 weeks ago, I was still just in the thick of it. So that's why that maternity leave is so important for women just in general, is because it takes a little while to get out of that kind of new mom bubble, exhaustion, the breastfeeding, all of that. So it was difficult sometimes just for being physically present online. And then I know there were a lot of my fellow colleagues that were able to kind of establish boundaries and keep to them with their students as far as my office hours are 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. I'm not going to respond afterwards. And I'm just not good with that. Like I respond to my students anytime that they message me. So sometimes at 2 a.m. when I was breastfeeding the baby, there'd be a kid that sent a message at 1 a.m. We were having conversations about classwork or just their mental health and what they were dealing with and going through at the time. So that was also a little bit exhaustive, but I just know that some of them do not have the support system at home, and they don't have somebody that's listening to them. We have where our county is like 70+% free and reduced lunch. So that means they're high poverty. Yeah, we're pretty low income around here. So I knew that there were a lot of them who weren't getting the support they needed at home. And it showed because our domestic violence rates were up in our county. So were our like number of kids being put into foster care and our child abuse cases. So I don't think any of my students dealt with that personally, but I just know like statistically, we definitely had a rise in mental health issues and abuse in the homes because of everybody being at home together a lot more often. So
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So in terms of, teaching the students, how was that in terms of getting the engagement? Is it you teach a mixed group of students, right? Boys and girls, right?
yes, yeah,
Okay.
boys and girls.
Right. So how was that in terms of getting the engagement? How was it, on an overall basis?
Well, I think it's interesting because so my kids that did really well in class, in person teaching, they were fine and they did their work and they were engaged. But some of my kids that struggled in face-to-face teaching actually did a lot better. And then I still had kids who didn't do well in class and they weren't doing well online either. So really it was about just trying to find like ways to engage them. Like you said, I mean, we kind of had a set, like the 7th grade team sat down and said, well, this is what we're doing. We used Scholastic Scope magazine articles that were on their grade level. And so we were like, okay, well, this is what we're doing. And if you want to kind of like do different things with it, that's kind of up to you. But this is kind of the text that we want to all use as a 7th grade team. So I had kind of these articles, like one week it was about sea turtles and one week it was about like fandoms, being a part of like fan clubs and things. And there was one about like pizza versus like how pizza was made in the US and how sushi was made. So it's whatever Scholastic article that the head of our 7th grade team chose for the week. But my kids did not like just reading those articles. That was dry to them. So I did projects every week. And that was where I got the most engagement. Like kids would not read the articles, they wouldn't mark the text, they wouldn't turn in questions, but they would do the projects. So that's kind of what I found worked for my students, was having a high engagement creative project for them to do. Like once was, we did like a thing about juuling, anti-juuling, anti-smoking articles about big tobacco. That's what the theme of the week was. And I had them do like create a public service announcement with text evidence from the text, but they could draw it or create it online. They could make like a graphic online or whatever they wanted to do. And I had almost 100% participation from that one. So yeah, so they enjoyed doing that, being able to create something. I did some where they could create from their homes, use objects around your house to create something, take a picture, send it in, just different things like that. That's what I felt worked the best with them.
It's interesting because I had another educator yesterday was saying the same thing, how much she was surprised as to what the student actually produced when she asked them to produce something practical. Whereas, the same thing when she asked them to do a piece of work, because she also taught English. She said it was not, they were not producing anything at all. But when she gave them a practical task to produce a video, she said she was surprised as to the quality she got. So this is actually demonstrating to us that the children connect more with practical things than they are doing with theory. The other thing about it is, how was your attendance? How many students do you normally have in your classroom, and how many students you had turning up online?
So I have like 65 to 70 in my classroom. It kind of fluctuated throughout the year. And attendance was all over the place. Like at the beginning, kids were like mostly there. We had a few stragglers that didn't really start attending until the 2nd or 3rd week. But then our districts came in and said all they had to do was attend like one Zoom or email their teacher or turn in one assignment for the whole week, and they were like counted as attended. So they may not have done work for my class, but they did it for science.
Right.
And our grades were also, they changed the formulation of our grades. So kids definitely felt like they didn't have to do the work. I mean, and I'll be honest, like if I was back in school I don't know if I would have been super gung-ho to do all the work if I knew that it didn't matter as much grade-wise. Um, I don't know. I never went through this kind of teaching, so I'm not sure for sure what I would have done. But yeah, I can understand though when we make policies that they were supposed to help the students, and they did, but it also helped them to be kind of lazy during this time.
Yeah. So one of the things I was going to ask you, do you think it was a good thing? I personally wouldn't think it's a good thing, because it means that this student is not coming to my lesson, and I want you to come to my lesson. So it means that they're now choosing what lesson they're going to be attending instead of going to all the lessons. Do you think that was a good thing, having choices?
No, I don't, because also what we're seeing is now the president and politicians are using policies like that to make a point to say that distance learning didn't work, kids didn't learn, they didn't really try, it's not rigorous enough. So if we had held them to more rigor and made them come to lessons and made sure that they had to get the grades, I think we could say more definitively that this did work, because I actually think that it worked. I mean, I think if we had to do it again, like, we shouldn't be going back into schools right now. We should be going back online, at least in Florida. We should be online. And I think that it does work if you hold the students accountable. And with them having, they had an option too. They had either the device, but if for some reason parents didn't want them to have an iPad, we had work packets. We had printed work packets. We printed them out, parents picked them up, and they did them and then brought them back every 2 weeks. So kids had options. It came down to, if you had held them accountable, they would have done it.
Right, yeah. The fact that, in your school that they had options, if they didn't have a device, they were still able to access the world because they had packages.
Yeah.
And one of the things we know as educators, when you give students too many choices, they will take the one that best suits them. And in your case, in the school case, that the student had choices, they're deciding what lesson they're going to go to and what lesson they're going to stay. Because what you would find that students who are early riser, they'll probably go to the early lessons, and students who didn't get up until 1 o'clock in the day, if your lesson is 10 o'clock, sorry, you're not seeing students until, whenever.
Yes. I had mine at noon, and I had, starting out first couple of weeks, 25, 30 students, so about half, or a little bit less than half. But by the end of it, I think like five students came. I mean, they didn't come. They didn't. Wow. But I kind of went around that, because I think, so this is where the good comes in, I think, because what I did learn from distance learning is I did get a couple of key things to take into my face-to-face classes, and that is one, videos. So I didn't do a lot of put up a lot of videos. I know some teachers are very dedicated and they do their lessons, but they also video their lessons and put them online, and I never did that. But I am definitely going to do that for my students this year. We're switching to Canvas, so there's a lot of things that I can do with Canvas, but that's what I started doing, because kids weren't coming to Zoom meetings for me to go over the material. So I put an hour-long video up every week that was walking through the text we were reading, marking the text, showing them how I marked the text, walking through the instructions, the questions, just basically reading everything to them, because I do have some readers that struggled. And especially going over project instructions. And that seemed, when I started doing that, about halfway through, that's when students started really turning in a lot more work. So I think they were having I just saw it worked. So definitely this year, I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to be utilizing probably Zoom to record myself and screen share and be able to read the text or post instructions for how to do a project, not just written instructions, but also. So I did learn a lot of things from this that I can take into the classroom.
That's fantastic, though, because at least you know what works for your students. You know that, they seem to engage a lot more when you actually, show them the information on the video and then walk them through it. But you see, that also means that in my head that the students are not taking responsibility for their own learning because they're given the whole work for them to do. Because, the fact that you're walking them through the text, you're underlining what they need to do. They don't have to think.
Yeah, well, I mean, two of my 3 classes this year, because we have block scheduling, so 90-minute classes. 2 of them were inclusion classes for special education students and for struggling readers. So I do have, that's what I would do in my daily classes, would be reading the text with them well, it was with them. I didn't read it to them, but they definitely still needed that. So, but I do think that in my county, we do have an advocacy problem and a problem with students taking accountability for their work. And that's not just through distance learning, that's through we have pressure to use policies, and this is not just my county, this is all over the country, but definitely in Florida, there are several counties who are pressuring teachers to give students 50s. So they could do nothing and they still want us to give them a 50 instead of a 0 to help them not to fail. Because the whole thing is they want to keep their failure rates as low as possible. That's the whole goal. And I've seen it. I've seen the effects of it. And it does lead to students not having much accountability. But then they go to high school and have my husband and he doesn't do that, and they definitely get 0s, and he's a lot more strict. So it's not helping them because we're babying them and babying them and babying them, and then they go to high school and they're like ripping the training wheels off. So it's hard.
Yes, because you see, the fact that you, as you rightly say, you're babying them, and when they actually go to the real world, which is in secondary school, in high school, reality is hitting them. Because hold on, you are not getting 50, you are getting 0 because your work isn't up to standard. So it means that in middle school or primary school, as we would call it, you guys are not preparing them for when they get to secondary school, to high school. Because when they get there, it's a rude awakening. They don't know what's going on.
Yes, but it's also hard because Florida we took away tenure. So like my job security is not as strong as some states with their teachers. Like this is going to my 4th year. And I'm not saying that I'll be fired for no reason, but if you don't do what's expected of you when it comes to the grades and the babying, you could find yourself with a bad evaluation, which could lead to losing your job. Wow. I mean, that's the reality of it. So, teachers feel so much pressure to follow these mandates that they don't believe in. I believe I do anything and everything I can to help my students as far as with grades, but I don't believe that they should be given the 50s instead of 0s. I don't believe that they should be babied. I do believe that they're not prepared for high school, and it's sad because I feel like my hands are tied.
It's a situation where you have to toe the line, because I also have, those setups sometimes, especially if you're doing coursework with students and the grades depend upon the coursework. You feel that you are giving them the work to complete and it's coming back, you're marking it and it's going back. And it frustrates me because my argument always is, I am not preparing the student because I keep on repeating, because they have to actually, I do the correction, hand it back to them, and they need to fix it. And it's just quite frustrating because I feel that I am not preparing them. But in order for, as you rightly say, sometimes in order for you to stay in that position, sometimes you have to reluctantly, I'm saying because it is reluctantly, toe the line. As I also said to one of my colleagues, this kind of teaching, I am not cut out for this teaching. So I'm no longer going to be doing those kind of teaching. Because I have a choice as to whether or not to teach, vocational courses or I teach academic courses. And I feel vocational courses are not for me because of the way, students could repeat it. And it's just frustrating. It's just frustrating. So I understand exactly what you're talking about, because you feel as if your hands are tied.
Yes, I feel like the US, and again, not everywhere, because I think some of the northern states are doing a better job, but especially in the South, I think there's a lot of states who are sending kids into the world who are unprepared. And I do think with college in mind, even though some of my students say like, well, there's no way I'm going to college, even at 12 and 13 years old. And I just always tell them that they're too young to make that decision.
Yeah.
They have no idea what they're gonna, they may have a total change in interest in high school and secondary and decide that they want to be, a veterinarian, and that's going to require a lot of college, a university. So I still try to teach them with the idea of, university in mind. And this is a whole, I could go on and on about that, but I just think that tests, especially having the standardized test, it doesn't prepare them for the skills that they're going to need in university at all. I mean, we don't even teach, it's not even in our curriculum really to teach research anymore. And I think that that's a huge portion that they have. That's a skill you have to have for university. And that's also why we have adults going out into the world who share things on Facebook from really terrible sources because they don't know how to research. And that's why they fall for the media, the things the media says, because they don't know how to just quickly Google search something and say, oh, wow, there's 5 sources right here that are much more credible that are telling me that what that source is saying is completely false. And it's sad because it definitely affects our country. And I'm seeing the effects of it.
Yeah, it is very, very true. One of the things I teach my students is, in terms of research, because I feel that they need to do that. So, one of the areas I teach is research, and also in terms of essay writing, etc. But I also very conscious of not every school cover that. When students actually get to university, sometimes that's where they actually have to do the research. They need to know how to reference. And in some cases, only when they get to university, they actually know how to reference. Because in some courses they do, it is not a requirement.
No, I mean, the way we teach essays right now is we give them, because again, this is how the standardized test does it. You get 3 or 5 sources and you write your essay from them. So they learn how to pull text evidence and they learn how to cite sources, but they don't learn how to find their own information. And that's what you have to, I mean, in university, for college, I wasn't given sources. I was told, pick a topic around this area in education, go find your sources, go look at your peer-reviewed journals and your books, and find your sources and your information and write a paper. That's how we were told to do everything. That's how my master's degree was too. So I just think that we're doing these kids a disservice because we're teaching to the test. That's the big thing. I don't know like what testing is like over in the UK. What is your standardized testing, or do you have any? What does it look like?
It's more or less the same, like, because we have testing at 7. That's the primary school, and then they then go into secondary school where they actually have the exams, etc. It's the emphasis on SATs, and I totally disagree with SATs being given in primary school. I don't feel it solves any purpose. I feel that it just increases the stress level of the educator and the children. Because it is good, the statistics look good for the school. It doesn't look good on the psychic of the child, the emotional or psychological well-being of the child and the educator, because it's very stressful. I find SATs very stressful in primary school. However, this is what is still given. I don't think it serves a purpose.
I think we're turning out students that aren't prepared for college or for the real world, because very few times are we going to have to answer multiple choice questions in a job even. But my kids do need to know how to do public speaking. They need to know how to have conversations like this, or to stand up and give a presentation at work, or to learn how to use PowerPoints and things like that. And I do go over those things, but I just don't have time to really cover it in depth because we're getting ready for those tests. So I feel like there's a lot of instruction time that's lost, but I still try to work it in as much as possible. Florida doesn't even have public speaking at all as a class, even in the secondary school. There's no speech. So I just think that's crazy that they aren't learning how to properly communicate and present information. That just blows my mind.
Yeah, but you see, this is throughout, because I was just on a call and one of the things we were looking at was the curriculum. The curriculum is not fit for purpose, my view, because you still have students that don't know how to manage money, that don't know how to do application forms, they don't know how to open a bank account, they don't know in terms of what overdrafts are, they don't know the percentage, when you actually go overdraft, you need to pay a percentage. They don't know all these basic things that they ought to know, and they also need to be society ready. They're not society ready. And I personally feel this should be part and parcel of the national curriculum, which students should have anyway, but they're not getting that. They give, like this standardized test, which personally, I don't feel that it does anything for them, especially in primary school, because we are not educating the students as they ought to be. The national curriculum doesn't serve the children. That's my view on all of that. Because they come out of education, and even though they don't want to go to college, they still don't know how to open a bank account. They still don't know how to do the basic. So when you look at that, it actually blows my mind. As educators, you actually take it upon yourself to teach those things to the children, but you don't have enough time to do that.
No, because we're too busy teaching to those tests. And I agree. I think that we're going to see the effects in 20 years. I think we're going to, like in the United States, we are going to feel the effects of undereducated children growing up to be adults and being society members. We're going to see the effects of students who don't get education about loans because I did take out student loans, so this is the pot calling the kettle black, but we have a huge problem with student loan debt in the United States right now. You have, kids, adults coming out of school with $50,000 to $100,000 in student loans because they chose private education instead of a community college state school route. So they have all that debt, which means that they're not buying houses, they're not buying cars, they're not putting money into the economy, and we're feeling those effects. And it's just going to get worse in the next 20 years because no one's educating students and high schoolers or secondary students about their choices, that they should be choosing cheaper options if they don't have parents that will pay for college, and that they should not be taking $50,000 to $100,000 out in student loans unless they're looking at the medical field or law, where they're going to be able to pay them off quickly because they'll have a high income. I mean, I understand medical school, if you want to be a doctor, that's going to be more expensive, but a teacher, you can get a really good education going the community college and state school route to be a teacher, in which we don't make very much money, which means, my husband and I are going to be paying our student loans off forever. We did buy a house, but that's because we had kids a little bit earlier than a lot of my friends that are teachers. But yeah, I just think the kids are just completely unprepared for real life. And I know a lot of people say, well, that's their parents' job to do that. But when you have these areas that are poverty ridden, which a lot of the United States does have an issue with poverty, they're not getting that education at home. Mom and dad are too busy, or it's just single moms who have to work all the time in order to afford the life, like a house or an apartment for their kid. So they're not at home to teach their kids that. And it's not necessarily I'm not blaming every parent for not being able to do that, because I think we do have a poverty problem in the United States. And there are parents or a parent that's working extremely hard to make sure their kids have food on the table and a roof over their heads, and they don't have time to educate them on these things because they're not at home, but it's because they're working. So
Yeah.
I don't know, it's a lot.
That is very true. And could you imagine, you actually touch on something where parents haven't got the time to educate the children. Whereas what we've actually just had is, teachers teaching the children online and expecting the parents to support the teaching online. How much support did you get from parents, in terms of when you actually were teaching the children online?
I had a pretty good amount of support.
Okay.
I had several parents that I had one-on-one Zoom meetings with them and their child to walk through the iPad, because that seemed to be the biggest issue, is that the parents didn't know how to help their child with the iPad, with how to find resources and assignments on Google Classroom, how to turn in things. So I had a lot of meetings where I shared my screen and I walked through exactly how to find things and what their child has turned in and what they haven't turned in. So, and that was from parents who really weren't involved at all when we were in the face-to-face learning, like physical school. They weren't really involved. Yeah, so I felt good about that I had several parents that I had not heard from at all who were like, can we please have a Zoom meeting? I don't know how to help them. They didn't just give up. They tried to find the answers. So, and I a lot of times helped them with other subjects too, like, I've got you, let's go through science, let's go through math. Where are we going to find these things for your student? So I felt that was good. My parents of students who were, really, really on top of things when we were in physical school, they were also on top of things when we were online. They were emailing, they were asking about grades. So that was good. I got Remind 101. So that's something I've never used with like normal, but I got that to try to communicate. It's like a texting app to communicate with students and parents. And I had several parents that joined as well as their students. So I'd send out blasts like, hey, we're having our Zoom at 12 o'clock today, don't forget. Or, hey, I uploaded all the grades for this week, so go check your grades. Or, hey, the new video is up, or whatever. Just sending out little blasts of information. I had a lot of students reply that way, or parents reply through that. But I'm also a part of a group for our county that was basically parents complaining about virtual school the whole time. It was very interesting. But there were several parents on there that just openly said, this is too hard, we can't do it. I've talked to my child, they understand the consequences of failing and they're just giving up. We're not doing any more school for this year. So if they have an F, they have an F. And these are like not necessarily high schoolers. These were middle schoolers or even elementary students. And I'm just thinking in my head, they don't understand the consequences. Like, you're trying to explain consequences to them. But if you're not holding them responsible, you can't sit here and say, my child understands the consequences of failing when you're advocating for it as a parent. That was, to me, was incredibly just disappointing, but also very surprising that there were so many parents that were just like, we give up. We're not doing any more schooling. We're done.
Really?
Yeah.
So what was some of the complaints I'm just really intrigued as to what was some of the complaints that were making on this chat? What were they saying about homeschooling?
Too many apps. Like, the teachers, like if they had a child in like 3rd grade, or so, like a 7-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 15-year-old, they were saying there's too many applications that we use on the iPad. They're not all the same. We don't all just use the same programs. I might use Google Classroom. The primary school uses 3 different programs other than Google Classroom. They just said there's way too much technology and too many apps that they don't understand to help their child.
Yeah, but these were different schools using different platforms.
Yes, which our district has, like, they did see that was a complaint last year, and so they've already remedied that situation. They're doing mandatory, every teacher, no matter what you teach, what grade, has to use Canvas this next year as the platform. So, and everything goes through Canvas. So even if you use, like, I use USA Test Prep, another app, it's going to go through Canvas. So they'll find all of it on Canvas and then click on it and it will send them to USA Test Prep. But they're not going to have to look at 3 or 4 different apps. It's only one. And I think that will help a lot. So I'm very thankful that our district has been so on top of it, and the fact that parent complaints, they took care of them pretty quickly. So they really couldn't change mid-year. That wasn't going to work. So we had to wait till the end. But they said, we're not dealing with that again. So they bought the rights to use Canvas district-wide. They're going to train us. I've already been doing some trainings through our teachers union on Canvas. And they're going to make sure that teachers know how to use it, so that, and they've said in their words, when we inevitably have to go back online, whether it's a class or one whole school or the whole district, we're prepared.
Right.
So,
Right.
that was the chief complaint. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's also one good thing, because it means that standardization have taken place.
Yeah.
And standardization could be quite useful, because it means that everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. So it makes life that much easier for educators in terms of, okay, you know that everybody using the same platform. So in terms of, sharing work across, it makes things easier.
Yes, and we're going to make sure, like, the first couple of weeks, they're going to make sure we get our iPads out sooner to the students. Normally it takes a couple of weeks, but like my school is going to get them out like immediately into the hands of the students, so that we have time to train them, because they've never used Canvas for the most part. So they'll have time to learn it. They'll also learn how to, like, my kids are going to learn how to send emails, because they could not send. I had so many students send me emails where the whole email is in the subject line. And that's just something I took for granted, that I just thought they would know how to do. But during distance learning, I couldn't get some of their emails because they put it on the subject line and it cuts it off after so many characters. So I had to email and say, hey, I need you to put this in the body of the email. I can't read your email. And they're like, I don't know how to do that. And I'm like, it's the big blank space. So yeah, I want to make sure they know how to informally, properly send an email, not like, hey, what's up? But, Mrs. Cuellar, blah, 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 blah. Here's my question. Sincerely, this is the student. I just realized that was a skill they were missing out on. So
yeah, you're not the only one, because as educators, because the students always have the phone attached to them, we assume that they know how to use the various platforms and they know how to use 2 emails. But to our detriment, when we actually came online, we realized that they don't know how to use the platform. So we were actually educating them as we were being educated ourselves.
Yes, it was almost like you had 2 different teaching curriculums going on. I was teaching them the actual content, and I was teaching them how to use technology and how to use Google Classroom and emails. That's what half of my videos I had to put out there were about, was here's how to use Google Docs. Let me screen share and show you how to open a doc, which I went over these things in class. And my kids, my curriculum during the school year is about 90% online. That's how I've chosen to do it. I don't accept physical copies or papers from students. I make them turn it all in online, because I do think that gives them a little bit more responsibility. They can't say my dog ate my homework, because there's no physical copy. So it's all online. And it's worked well for the past 3 years for me. And it helps cut down on germs and paper clutter in the classroom.
Yes.
So my kids have been using. So I will say that for me, going online was way easier than some of my teacher counterparts who were completely paper-based. I can't imagine what the struggle was for them. But mine was a little bit easier. But then I realized there were still, they didn't know how to retrieve, like they would delete docs out of like on Google Classroom, you'd have like the delete button right next to the submit button. They would delete them. So I had to do a video walking through, here's how you retrieve your deleted file from your Google Drive because it's still saved. So that's another thing I realized for this next year, I want to do that proactively. So on Canvas, I have a whole page dedicated to videos that I'm putting up one at a time that are all the different components of here's how to work 5-minute video on how to work Google Drive. Here's how to submit an assignment on Canvas. Here's how to send an email properly and what you need to include. Here's how to submit your assignments. Here's how to create a graphic on Canva, an app that I use for graphic creation. So, so then they can watch it and rewatch it and walk through, like doing the actual, like creating an email while they're watching my video of how to do it. So I'm hoping that that will cut down on the confusion for them because they'll have that to constantly refer back to. But yeah, it was like teaching 2 curriculums because they didn't know how to use the technology.
Yeah, and that you see, there's so many educators I've spoken to about that, and we all were under the same impression that they didn't know how to use the technology. We thought they knew how to use the technology because they always have a phone attached to them. Only when we actually come onto this online platform, we realize, damn it, they don't know how to use the technology. So you are trying to learn the technology yourself while trying to teach them how to use it.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, just like it was crazy. Some of the conversations I had, like I had a student who was like, well, my iPad's not working. And I tried to walk her through troubleshooting her iPad. And finally I was like, well, that phone that you have in your hand right now, you can use Google Classroom on the phone. And she's like, what? I can download Google Classroom? And I'm like, yeah. So she did. And then she started doing all of her assignments through the phone. So they don't even realize a lot of times that they can download it onto several different devices. It's not just the iPad that we give them. It's just an app that they can download anywhere. So it's just, yes, it was crazy to find out how little they actually knew about the technology. And I felt myself saying so many times, we went over this in class. We did this every single day in class. How do you not know how to do this? And they're just like, oh, I don't know. So we worked on it, it just had to keep taking it one step at a time. So it's going to be 10 times worse with a new platform though. Even if I do teach them, even if I do put the videos out there, they're still going to be so confused when we inevitably have to go online for a period of time next year, because it won't be Google Classroom. They're so a completely different interface that's more like what they use at the college level. For several colleges use Canvas. So it is more, it's just not as like bright and friendly and easy to use as Google Classroom. But for the teachers, there's a lot that you can do on it. It does way more than Google Classroom does.
Okay. Another question is, so your school give every child an iPad?
Yes, every child has an iPad.
Is that temporary or they keep it? Is that to be kept?
They get it at the beginning of the year and they keep it throughout the year.
Okay, and they hand it back when they finish the school?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So which means that is there an insurance to say, okay, these are the criteria for them to keep it safe, or there's some iPad that would be missing at the end of the year?
So if they lose the iPad, then they or like really damage it to where it can't be fixed and it has to be replaced, then it goes on their, well, if parents pay it, then that's the end of it. But if they don't, it goes on their record. So like when they go to high school, it follows, or secondary, it follows them. So they can't like check out a library book or get their diploma if they're a senior until they pay for that iPad.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, thank you. Another aspect in terms of, you teaching while online, you also said that your husband is an educator. So how did that work? with both of you being educators, both of you are teaching online, both of you are home, you have 2 children under 2, what was the dynamics? What was it all about?
So we have a computer set up in our guest bedroom that my husband primarily worked out of, and I primarily worked on I have a MacBook Pro that I used most of the time, either like here where I am right now or at our kitchen table. And we just had our 2 separate spaces. But I will say, and we talked about this before, like when we were conversing before we got online, that it was hard because, and I think having a new baby had a lot to do with it, but I felt very tied to our home. So I stayed and did all of my work from home with all of its distractions, took care of the 2.5-year-old and the baby and breastfed and all of that. But my husband, he did not feel like he could work from home. He was constantly distracted. He was not getting his stuff done. So he started going into the school like 3 times a week. So I didn't feel like I had the luxury to do that at all. So I think that's interesting. And I'm sure there were a lot of women that felt the same way. Like maybe their spouses weren't working as a teacher, but they might have been working from home in a different aspect. And I just felt, we both had the option. I could have gone into school to have, my materials and my computer there and my very clean, quiet classroom, but I just didn't feel like that was an option for me. And my husband didn't feel like he could work here, so he did go. But so it was difficult. And there were a lot of distractions. My 2.5-year-old she is a terror. She's great, but she is just getting into everything. She made appearances on so many faculty meeting calls when I did have my camera on because she just popped up. She's like, I want to see. So she'd sit with me. And luckily, my district and my school was very understanding of that. There were several kids that would pop up during meetings. Because like, what can you do at that point? Your teachers are doing what they can. They're working very hard. But sometimes the 2.5-year-old can't be ignored all the time. She wants to be a part of it. So they didn't, they were very welcoming, like, hi, Olivia, and everything. So that was good. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting, the difference in the gender roles. And, like I said, I did not have the option. Like, really, I didn't really have the option of leaving, but my husband did. So.
Yeah. That actually clearly demonstrates some of the challenges female educators have to encounter with being a parent who is also an educator, right? Whereas, as you clearly explained to us, if the fact that your husband, he had the luxury of getting up and leave because he's not breastfeeding, even though you express, it's still a situation where you still worry about that baby with him so young while you go off to the classroom. So we don't have those luxuries sometimes. We have to, to combine everything and just run with it. And the other thing, you said about your child popping up. This is some of the challenges or some of the issues teaching at home online. As female educators, we have no choice. We'll have this young one, popping up now and then because, this child feels, I've been at home, I've been by myself for too long. The child wants interaction. So what could you do? Nothing. I've had a number of shows where, the parents are talking to me and then, the little child is going through the back, or coming and wave or pulling the mother away. That's expected.
Yeah.
These are some of the challenges.
Yeah, and like I was talking about, so for next year we have either the brick and mortar or we've created like a citrus virtual school type for Florida. And so it's interesting because part of the like agreement on the virtual school for the state of Florida is that you can't have no distractions teaching virtually. And so they don't really, I don't know if it's completely 100% not allowed for you to have your kids at home, but they are very strict about not having distractions. So I don't see how you can teach and have your children at home. So it's just interesting that that expectation is on there for now the teachers that are going to full-time teach virtually, to not have their kids, you know, because I think that's part of the pool of wanting to teach virtually is to, that's why I would do it. I would want to keep my 4-month at home and not have to send them to a daycare facility. And it's just crazy that that would even be considered like a restriction that they would want to put on teachers, because I don't know. I mean, teachers should, this is the other thing, because of all this pandemic and everything going on, like I should, as a parent, have the right not to send my kids to school, just like every other parent has the right.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a little bit different, because if a parent wants their child to learn, I need to be in the classroom.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we don't have that option the same way, like, you know, our kids have to go to daycare or they have to go somewhere else, because, you know, even teaching virtually, you don't have the option of having your kids at home. So really, why would I? I'm going to go in and try to teach the kids that are going to be at school, because I think those are the kids that need it more. And I don't know. It's just crazy to me that they are expecting so much from teachers, and we have our own kids at home and we have our own families to worry about, but yet they expect us to go into the classroom right now with everything going on.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with you. This is because that's why some parents actually go part-time teaching, right? That's why, you know, in terms of, that's why some parents decide, okay, they're going to go part-time because of staying at home. So when the children come home, or staying at home with the children, because that's an option we should have. Because once there's restriction, it kind of defeats the reason why you want to be at home.
I know, and it just, like I was saying in our earlier conversation, you know, we teachers are the sacrificial lambs to the economy. I've heard that in quotes all over Facebook and the internet right now. We're the sacrificial lambs, because there are going to be teachers that die from this. Yeah. We don't know who, but you know, we are going to lose some teachers.
Yes.
We're going to lose some students. Like I was seeing the projections today. Someone did the math. They were like, okay, there's like so many millions of students, and let's say that the rate of them getting this is 2%. Okay, well, that's how many are infected. Now we've got, we'll say 0.5% of those infected, or even like a third of that die from this. We're still looking at, it was like 1,600 children that could possibly die from this in the United States alone. And that's okay. You know, like, I don't understand what politicians are doing or thinking. I don't understand what governors are doing or thinking, especially in Florida, where we have, our numbers are skyrocketing. This is nothing like it was in March and April when we were shut down. Mm-hmm. It is 10 times worse here in Florida than it was at that time. And our hospitalizations are way worse. Mm-hmm. So, but we're only going back because they want to get the economy up and running, and parents can't work their jobs in the economy unless kids are at school. So we're babysitters right now, essentially.
Yes, but you see, educators have always been babysitters. I've always seen it like that. As much as we educators, we also babysitting as well. It's twofold. Yeah. It's twofold, because especially now that when we actually go back to school, one of the things our focus would be on is the psychological and emotional aspect of that child, because my concern would be okay, I need to ensure that the child's psychological and emotional aspect are dealt with before I actually look at the intellectual. The intellectual is coming way down the list, because for me, the intellectual is not as important as the emotional and psychological, because these children have been locked at home with parents that they had issues with before, right? Or parents that are tired, parents that don't know how to spend time with the children. Remember, before this, parents wasn't spending time with the children. Some of them don't even know the children. We know the children. They don't know the children. So could you imagine the psychological impact all this have had on the children, that because they cannot go anywhere, they're stuck in the house. So I do feel that before we're able to address the intellectual aspect of the child, we need to address the emotional and psychological aspect.
And I agree. But then it goes back to where is the time? How are we going to do that? Because again, yes, I want to address my children's mental health right off the bat, and I'm going to, but there's only so much I can do because I have to teach them so that they can pass the test at the end of the year, because I know it's going to affect their psychological well-being if they have to give up band that they love next year or art because they fail this test, because I spend too much time on the mental health side and not enough on the curriculum. So it's finding that balance of how we can teach them the curriculum so that they'll pass, but also make sure that they are taken care of mentally, and that we do this lightly. We ease them back into school and being here full time. You know, because you've also got the reverse side of that. There are going to be kids whose mental health is worse because they did enjoy being with mom and dad at home, or mom or dad, you know, that they enjoyed being at home. It was safe for them. Maybe they have bullying at school. Like, they didn't have to deal with any of that for the last few months. So they're going to be, but maybe they have to come back. So like, they're also going to be upset about having to be in the classroom again. Or those kids that are terrified of getting sick. You know, they've been listening to their parents talk about what the news is saying, and they've been watching the news, and they are scared of this pandemic. So there's just so many factors and so many things that have to be addressed when we go back, and there's no funding to do a lot of it. That's the other side of it. We have no money in the schools to be able to address a lot of these issues. You know, we're not even, masks are not going to be required at my school. They're encouraged but not required. They're going to provide some masks for employees, but they're not providing masks for students, so there's not money to buy the mask for the students, for that many masks across the district. So it's just, there's just not any money to do a lot of the things that we need to do to help these students get back on a good path in their education.
You know, the other thing about it is, you know, one of the concerns are, when the students go back, would there be enough counselors? Because I know one of the role we play already is that of a counselor. So I do feel that when we go back into the physical classroom, a lot of us would be playing more of a counseling role. We'll have to play more of that role, whereas it used to be a one-off. But I do feel that it's going to be so much more now, because there aren't enough counselors to go around with this, you know, with the whole school that is coming back.
Absolutely. We only have 2 at my school for almost 800 kids. And yeah, there's not going to be, they're going to be spread too thin. Teachers are going to be counseling their students. And I mean, it was already like that before we left. Just in normal school, there were a lot of students that confided in me or in other teachers. And it's going to be tenfold now, because they're coming back with a lot more issues. And, you know, that's because of that, teachers need to have training on mental health, more extensive training. We do have some, but we need more. And we need to have specific training on how to help these students with these related issues, like coming back from a rough household because you were stuck with your family during this pandemic, or like dealing with anxiety because they are so concerned about themselves or a family member dying from COVID. Like, there are very specific issues that have cropped up just because of this pandemic that we need training on how to talk to the students. Because, you know, I'm going to act in the role of a counselor, but I don't have the same freedom as some counselors. Like, there are things that I cannot say to the students. There are ways that I could be of more harm than helpful You know, you have to be so specific and careful about what you say to students when it comes to like mental health. So we do need training. And again, we need the funding for the training. So it's just going to be, I think that this is going to be the worst year for most teachers, even teachers that have been teaching 20 plus years. I think that they're going to be able to look back and say this was the hardest and worst and most difficult year that I had in my career, because it is going to be, teachers are going to have a lot more expectations, and it's going to be a very different environment than anything that we've taught in before.
Yeah. Thank you. What actually crossed my mind as you were talking in relationship to the role we'll now be going back and play, right? Because we'll be doing a lot more counseling role, but we also need to unload. Who do we unload to? That's the whole thing about it. Because like you, I know when students are confiding you, yes, you discuss it in terms of, the staff meeting, etc. But when there's so many of them coming to you, who do you unload to? There isn't anyone.
I luckily have started this summer, and really from like being in postpartum, I have started therapy. So I can talk to my counselor. And it has been really helpful with kind of easing some of this anxiety that the huge amount of overwhelming anxiety that I feel about going back into the classroom. I talk to my counselor about that weekly. But you're right, we aren't going to have anybody to talk to about this unless districts and states are proactive about like getting affordable counseling options for teachers. And I think that they're going to have to make a priority of getting teachers connected with counselors in the area who will do it at an affordable rate, because a lot of teachers can't afford $100 per session for counseling. They're going to have to figure it out, because otherwise they're going to get teachers who are taking so many sick days because they're going to have anxiety that's manifesting itself physically, which means upset stomachs that maybe might have symptoms like the stomach flu, headaches, like fatigue, exhaustion. Will deal with more teacher burnout. It's definitely going to take its toll on teachers if they don't find a way to express how they're feeling and unload on someone. I agree completely with that.
Yeah. You see, because, as you rightly say, in terms of cost, you are fortunate because you have a therapist you could talk to. There'll be a lot of educators out there who do not have that luxury as you have. So they'll be carrying around this heavy load of, the anxiety. And as you rightly said, it then turn out in burnout. And when they're actually talking to the student, it might come out in frustration, not because they're frustrated with the student, but because their well-being have not been taken care of. So it actually manifests itself in anxiety towards the student, not intentionally. So those are, it's so big.
That's not even something I honestly had thought about, but now I'm thinking about it as you're talking, and I'm like, yes, we are probably going to see a raise in discipline issues with teachers, because they are going to be frustrated, and they are maybe going to experience or kind of unload on students a little bit. We have to be very careful about what we say in the classroom and what we do. Exactly. And a teacher who already might have a more like strict demeanor in the classroom might yell at a student, and again, like completely unintentionally, but they're just so overwhelmed. But you yell at a student, you're going to end up getting in trouble for that. That's not going to be taken lightly. So I'm going to be very interested to see what the discipline rate is for teachers during this time, and if we have more discipline issues because teachers are frustrated and exhausted and unable to keep from saying the wrong thing, or just, like I said, yelling, screaming. I mean, those kind of things aren't acceptable to our administrators in the classroom, even though they are perfectly human reactions to a state of emergency, which is what we're dealing with right now.
Exactly. So those are some of the Those are some of my concerns as an educator in terms of when we go back into the physical classroom. Those are some of the things, because as we say, it's not intentionally when you might yell at a student. A student might, ordinarily you wouldn't even take that as an issue. But at that time, because you are so overwhelmed, the fact that you're in the classroom there, the students have no mask, the pandemic is, situation is still there. The number of cases is still rising. You're fearful for your health. There's so many issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And teachers just being very, I think there are going to be a lot of teachers that are going to be taking this, like the precautions. And if you have a student that comes up to your desk and you've got your face mask on and you're doing everything you can to distance yourself, and they come right up to you, which they will do, especially in primary,
yeah,
it's going to be a lot to be able to just calmly be like, please back away.
exactly.
I don't want to expose you, and I don't want you to expose me to anything. Please back away from the desk. There are going to be teachers that might yell and might get upset because it's just human reaction. This is scary for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. It is a human reaction. This is so big. The more you talk about it, the more you could actually see how, the anxiety of educators are rising. Because for me as an educator, there is no way I would feel comfortable going back in the classroom when I know the cases are rising.
Yeah,
because
I know, and there's.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just saying that I think that's why there's so many like petitions going on right now to the governor and our politicians in Florida that have gotten like hundreds of thousands of signatures from teachers and parents who are saying we don't need to go back until there's been 14 days, no new cases in counties. We don't need to go back. It's not safe. I don't think they're going to listen, but we are trying. Educators are trying to still kind of put our 2 cents out there. And there are some counties like Miami-Dade, which is Miami area, very big area, and like Broward County, which is very close to Miami, and Palm Beach, which is a very rich county. They've put their foot down and they've said, no. Our governor said, you're going back. You have to go back full time, 5 days a week to brick and mortar. End of story. And they said, no, we're going online. We're not going back brick and mortar. So, yeah.
At least that, that part they were more proactive and standing on the grounds and say, hold on, we are not going back. You see, more areas need to stand up and say, hold on, we need to think in terms of the well-being of the educators, because it's a situation where the cases are rising. That's the anxiety of it. The fact that the cases are rising. How many students would you have in the classroom that have actually got the disease and nobody knows about it? Oh, it's quite obvious. It's a very worrying cases for educators, especially, in terms of the pay is not fantastic anyway. So it's like you're having the short straw of everything.
Yes, and I know that some like politicians are using the fact that kids are allegedly, because again, we don't really know on a large scale what is going to happen with the kids. But they're saying right now that kids are majority of them are asymptomatic. But to me, that's not any better. Kids are going to come in to like my class having COVID, not having symptoms, not being sick, but having it, being a carrier of it. They're going to pass it to me and my colleagues. We're going to get sick. They may not get sick, but the teachers are going to get sick. So, I mean, I don't feel like that's a good argument to be like, well, kids aren't really getting it. They're just, asymptomatic carriers of it. That's not better. That's not any better. And I just, like I had said earlier, like we are going to lose teachers. We're going to lose students. How many, we don't know yet. It's truly devastating that on social media, what I'm seeing from many educators in the state of Florida that I follow groups of, they're asking how they can get access to a lawyer or how can they create a living will. That's what they're worried about. That is their concern, is they're trying to make sure that their families are taken care of because they're so worried about dying from this, or being on a ventilator and not being able to make decisions. So they're wanting to be able to create medical wills so that they won't be left on a ventilator forever, that they'll have made that decision whether or not they'll be, living the rest of their life on a ventilator, or if they'll be allowed to die, essentially, and also where their money and their assets are going to go in the case of their death. That is what their main concern is right now.
That's quite sad.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very sad. Because the politicians are not looking at it, okay, let's just get it sorted online until we have the cases, reduction in the cases. That's quite sad. That's very, very sad.
It is. And the fact that they're saying this out of one side of their mouth, and the other side they're saying, okay, we're going back. Because we know it's not just about a job. That's the thing is, I have seen some educators, they're like, no, I can't afford to take off. I have to go back to work. But a lot of them are saying, okay, look, I'm terrified. I don't want to go back, but my kids need me. So I'm going back.
Yeah.
And that's why they're doing it, for the kids, because they're dedicated.
Yeah. Boy, it's quite frightening in terms of where we are as educators. And there again, how educators' views are not being listened to, because they are the one who are in the front line, and no one is listening as usual. Hence the reason why this platform, we need to tell our story. It is so important that we tell our story. I cannot stress enough about the importance of that, because everybody feels that they know what is going on for us. We are in the front line. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you very much. Have you got any tips in terms of teaching online with a young baby? Because that's what some of the challenges you've had.
I think my tips are, you might have to spread your schedule out a little bit, to when the baby's sleeping, if your baby has gotten into a schedule, try to schedule meetings and Zoom meetings and whatever else when your baby is asleep. My son sleeps in the morning, so I would need to do everything early in the morning. And communicate. I think the biggest thing is just communication. You have to communicate more when you're doing virtual learning than even when you're in the classroom with parents and students. You just have to continuously check on them, because especially with my kids that I was teaching, they wouldn't always come to me, but if I reached out to them, they would tell me what's going on. They wouldn't always email me and say, hey, look, I'm really stressed, or hey, I don't understand this assignment. But if I go and say, hey, do you understand what's going on? You haven't really been present the last couple of lessons. What do you need help with? Then they would respond and they'd ask for help. So you just have to over communicate. And like you said, take time for self-care. When you're done for the evening, watch your favorite show, or take a bubble bath, or spend time with your baby. Whatever you need to do to relax. I think just take care of yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I so agree with this aspect, Ariel, in terms of self-care. Educators need to make sure they look after themselves, because if you don't, there's no way you'll be able to look after your students. It is so important. You need to switch off. I've had educators are saying to me that they've been teaching on the online platform. Sometimes they don't remember, they don't even have time to eat. That should never be. You need to take some time off, because when you are exhausted and when you are burnt out, you'll be no good for the students you're supposed to be teaching. It makes no sense.
Yep.
We need to start making self-care a priority. Self-care is not selfish. Self-care is a priority. So when you don't take care of yourself, I see it as selfish, because when you're ill, everybody else suffers, so that's selfishness. So when you actually take time off for you to make sure that you remain healthy, that can never be selfish. No way that could be selfish. That is actually loving yourself.
Yes, and I think our districts and our politicians and state officials have to understand that too. We have some districts that made really strict rules with Zooming, that you couldn't eat while you were on the Zoom, like in a faculty meeting or with your students. So if you have back-to-back meetings all day long, I can 100% see how someone would go without eating, because if I'm not allowed to eat on camera, then when am I going to eat? I mean, and you get a physical lunch break when you're in school. They make sure it's mandated, and you absolutely have that 30 minutes to yourself, at least in my district. But that's not guaranteed on Zoom, or on distance learning with Zoom. I mean, if you have meetings scheduled, you have meetings scheduled, and that's just how it is. So I think that our districts have to be intentional about like setting a time, like, okay, 12 o'clock to 1, we're not going to have any meetings at all across the district. Principals can't schedule anything. Don't schedule anything with your students, because that is your lunch time. And planning, because we also need planning time. That's your lunch and planning time, is that 12 o'clock. So I'm interested to see if they'll try to make some of these things more of a reality if we and when we inevitably have to go back online at some point, that they'll be more intentional about that. Because you're right, we should have time to eat. We should have time to take even just a quick walk around the block to get outside. You know, and not be stuck in a room with your computer all day long, because that's not healthy either.
Exactly. That is so very true, because when educators are saying that they don't have time to eat because of the classes, it's so very true. Because if you say if things are scheduled back to back, you're losing out, and that's not fair, because in the classroom you do have your 30 minutes or 45 minutes break, lunch break. You don't have that. So therefore, that must be scheduled. And I do blame educators as well, because educators are giving the power away. We need to take our power back. We have to, because our power also means self-care. So we need to take that power back, because nobody's going to look after ourselves for us. Because, you know, the principal, the district, they're not interested in if you're sick. They just replace you. And we need to remember that. We really do need to remember. Educators, self-care. You need to take that power back of self-care. Thank you so very much, Cheryl. I am so grateful that you actually, came onto the platform and actually tell us what it is really like to be teaching online with children. Because some of us have been teaching online, we have all the children. It's been challenging. But at the same time, teaching online when you have children that are under 5 and are not yet school age. So thank you very, very much for enlightening us regarding some of the challenges. Thank you, Facebook. Is there anything else you want to say to us before actually say goodbye?
No, thanks for anybody out there who's listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting the offer. Thank you very much, Facebook. Thank you, my tribe, my educators out there, my non-educators, my followers. I do appreciate you actually coming on. Whatever question you've asked, I cannot see the questions because I do not have my Facebook on. So I'll be answering the question after. And I am still looking for female educators who would like to share their own story. There are 2 criteria. Obviously, you have to be a female educator. And secondly, you must have either worked online or working online now, or even in the physical classroom. Because what I'm looking at is how you have actually negotiated, or how you've actually worked during this pandemic. What are the issues? What are the challenges? What are the triumphs? As much as the challenges, there are a lot of triumph, because as Errol said, the things you are going to take back into the classroom, because the things online we actually could use in the classroom, because it have actually made us become very creative, which we would, exactly. Although we were creative in the classroom, we even become even more creative, especially when the students are not engaging. We have to think very differently. As educators, we are constantly thinking on our feet, but we even thinking even more so when we're on the online platform, because it is now a new normal, and we need to find a way to engage the students to give them the information they need. Thank you very much to everybody. Have a fantastic evening and stay blessed.